Hello world. I wanted to take a few minutes here to talk about my little orange betta fish who 17 days ago suffered some severe physical trauma. I woke up one morning, saw he had the white ring around his left eye that is suggestive of incoming pop eye. I would then notice after the eye popped there was also significant damage to the gill behind that eye, where the gill was not closing flush with the body. And I would then discover that he was no longer willing to use his mouth. I don't know if that's because the mouth had some sort of structural damage or if it was just something to do with the gill. Maybe the way the mouth is tied to the gill might have been too painful for him to use his mouth. I'm not sure exactly what was going on there, but the eye was popped, the gills were not closing flush, and he was not opening his mouth. And if he doesn't open his mouth, of course, he's not eating either. So several problems there. And I went online to try and research how to treat a betta fish with serious physical trauma. Found almost nothing other than how to deal with pop eye that is the result of physical trauma. Now, I'm not a veterinarian. I don't have any expertise in fish, betta or otherwise. I'm just some guy on the internet who has a fish in trouble, and I want to relate to you what I have been doing. This was 17 days ago, and my fish is still alive, still recovering. He's not fully healed yet, but nonetheless, after 17 days of him not eating, at least not eating normally, where a betta fish would normally be said to go 10 to 14 days without eating, I'd like to think that I figured something out that possibly could be of some use to some of you who might be having trouble with a fish that is refusing to eat due to physical trauma. There are a great many reasons why a betta fish might not eat that have nothing to do with trauma. So if your fish is not eating and it's not a result of physical trauma, this is not the video for you. But if you have a fish that does have trauma and he's not eating, I have some suggestions here that you can try. No promises that anything will work. It just happens that it seems like it's probably working for my fish, since he has gone 17 days without eating normally. So I'm guessing it's working. I can do another update video a week from now, let you know how he's doing. But 17 days without eating, he still swims around normally, he shows off his fins, he seems happy, he's just trying to live life normally. And you don't do that if you're starving to death. So I think what I've got here has been successful for my fish for the trauma that he suffered. So, to start with, what exactly happened to him? I can't even say with any certainty. I did not witness him suffer any trauma. My guess is at night, I put a floating log in his tank, and I put it in at night because he likes to sleep inside of it. In the morning, when he wakes up, and I go to feed him, I remove the log so that he has that much more surface area to feed off of, and then I don't put the log back in until the night. And because he's always slept inside the log, it was never a concern to me. But I noticed about a week or two prior to this happening, he was no longer sleeping inside the log, but he would nestle into some leaves that were right adjacent to the log. And my guess is that at some point during the night, when he was sleeping next to the log probably bumped into him, startled him out of a deep sleep, freaked him out. He zipped around the tank, smashed his head into the log on the left side. Just a guess, but that would be the only thing I can really come up with. I've been very careful about the decorations that go into the tank. The plants are all silk plants. There's nothing sharp or pointy. I have a couple of very smoothed rocks. There's nothing with any jagged edges. The only thing there that is not entirely safe is that log, and that's only in there during the nighttime hours. So it would have to have been an overnight injury, presumably caused by the log. I don't have any other explanation for it. So, what have I done since then? As soon as I recognized that he was injured, I moved him to a very small tank where I put in one small silk plant, one small circular hollowed out rock, very smooth and polished, so that he would have some places where he could go to hide and get under cover if he felt the need, and then a little 10-watt heater. This was just a 1-gallon tank, very, very small. I don't want him moving around a lot anyways. If he's got a popped eye, my expectation is he can't see out of that eye. He's going to have trouble moving around. If I put him in a small tank, he's going to figure out he doesn't have anywhere to move around to anyways. He's going to be disincentivized from trying to do too much, and he'll just have to sit there and focus on recovering. So step one, put him in a small tank with very minimal, very safe decorations and a little heater. There's no filter in there. You can't really do a filter in a 1-gallon tank, but that means doing full water change, 100% water change on a daily basis, which I believe is probably good for the healing process anyways. Especially at one point during the treatment, for about 6 or 7 days in, he started to get this white, cottony looking kind of filaments, probably a fungus, coming off of his head. And when you are dealing with something like a fungus, full water changes is probably really good. Whatever fungus may have come off of his head will get removed, so you won't have to have it recurring in the tank from day to day. So my course of action on this, on the first day, after moving him into the small tank, I put in some aquarium salts and garlic juice. The aquarium salts are said to promote gill function and general health. Since he has a damaged gill, I thought that would be good. And the garlic juice, garlic is antibacterial, antiviral, antifungal, just all around good stuff. So I did that, and then I went off and researched what am I supposed to do for a fish with physical trauma, of which there's very little information other than what to do in the case of Popeye from physical trauma, which is to do an Epsom salt bath. So on the second day, I did the Epsom salt bath, and there are plenty of tutorials out there on what to do, how to do it. I'm not going to go through that here, but the Epsom salt bath was done, and then I put him back into his small tank with the regular aquarium salts and the garlic juice still, and then on day 3, just more of the same. But after 3 days, there was no significant changes. His Popeye and his gills were not getting any worse, but they were also not getting any better. He still refused to open his mouth, still refused to eat. So as a precautionary measure, I did a 4-day regimen of erythromycin. Especially with that open gill, I was, of course, very concerned about the possibility of infection, especially during the time when he had been in his normal tank. Who knows, that doesn't get daily water changes. Who knows what's going on in that tank, where a normal healthy fish could fight off whatever. When you're injured, you can't always fight it off. So even though he wasn't developing any signs of anything, just as a precautionary measure, I went through the regimen of erythromycin to make sure that nothing would develop. It was during this, on the last day, on day 4 of the erythromycin, I started to notice what I think was the fungal growth on his head. So on the 5th day, and of course at this point, when you're doing the erythromycin, you can't do daily water changes. Now the instructions for the medicine are very specific about how you dose. So when I got to the end of the 4th day, and I could do a full water change for him, because he had the fungal growth, I went back immediately to the aquarium salts, which are supposed to be really good for dealing with fungus, as well as the garlic juice, because that also is an antifungal. And ever since then, ever since completing that 4-day course of erythromycin, he gets 4 days of aquarium salts and garlic juice, and then 1 day of nothing added to his water at all. So he gets a day of pure clean water, just the water conditioner, nothing added, and then go back to another 4 days of salts and garlic juice. He's been through this cycle twice now, and after doing this, after going through all of this, after 17 days where he has not eaten normally, and I'll get back to that in a moment, he's still swimming around normally, showing off his fins, very happy, trying to behave completely normal in every way other than not eating. Because he's not eating, of course, he's not pooping either. Nonetheless, for the most part, he seems like a perfectly normal, happy, healthy fish. The eye still is slightly popped. The cloudiness of the eye has faded away. I can see the eye is moving to track things. I don't know if you can actually see out of that eye, but it is tracking. Of course, most animals with two eyes, the eyes track together, so the left eye moving to track things might just be a consequence of him seeing and tracking something with his right eye. The left eye naturally follows. Don't know that he's seeing out of that left eye. I can't make that determination. Part of the reason I can't make that determination is because the gill is still damaged and does not close flush with the body. He's not able to flare. He's not been flaring at all at anything. I could put my finger right up against his face on the side of the tank or the top of the water, and there's no flare response whatsoever. And if he's not going to flare, I can't try bringing the finger in from just one side or the other to see if he reacts on one side and not the other side. He doesn't react on either side, even the side with the good eye. So I can't really decide as yet whether or not he's got any vision restored in the left eye. Like I said, the cloudiness in the lens is fading away. The swelling of the lens is reduced. So it's still popped. It's not as bad as it was. It's getting better. The eye is moving. It's tracking. It looks good. The pupil looks good and normal underneath. So I'm very hopeful that he will regain full use and function of that eye in the long term. It's all looking really good right now. The gill, like I said, still damaged, still not closed flush with the body. This is very concerning to me. An open gill like that is going to be a source of infection. That'll be a very easy way for infectious agents to enter the body, and I'm very, very worried about that. Maybe it'll get better over time, maybe it won't. It looks like the gill still functions normally. Anytime he's highly stressed, like when I do a water change, he breathes very heavily, and I can see that damaged gill is functional. It's just not closing flush with the body. Like I said, I don't know if that's going to ever fully heal up or not, but at least the gill functions, so that's encouraging. The mouth, as I said, he's not been eating at all over the past 17 days. I did notice maybe after 10 or 11 days, I did see him give a little yawn. Obviously, that means his mouth was open, and ever since that day, he's been able to use his mouth to varying degrees. He gives little yawns, he blows bubbles, he seems to be regaining use of his mouth, but he's still not eating. He will not eat or chew with that mouth, even though he can now open it and seemingly use it in most of the ways I'm used to seeing him use his mouth. So it's good that his mouth is now functional, but not yet to the point of eating. And of course, I'm concerned about how much longer is that going to take before he starts eating normally. So, given that the fish is not eating normally, it obviously begs the question, how has he gone 17 days when a betta fish is expected to go somewhere in the ballpark of 10 to 14 days without eating? Well, at one point, maybe 7 days in, I caught him skimming the surface of the tank. I don't know why. I don't know what he was expecting, but it gave me an idea. I had the Zoom Med dilatreat thing with Daphnia, bloodworm, and mysis. And I'd always been very annoyed that most of what was in the mysis compartment was just this fine powder. There was very little solid mysis in there. I didn't know why it came that way. I was very annoyed by it, and it wasn't much I could do with it, so I was never really able to give my fish the mysis treats. But it occurred to me, seeing him skimming the surface like that, what if I take some of that powdered mysis, spread it over the surface, so as he skimmed the surface, some of that powder would go in his mouth and hopefully into his belly. So I started doing that. And I would do that 4 times a day, morning, noon, afternoon, and evening. And I would leave the powder on the surface for half an hour, which I know would make many people cringe because that's going to cause ammonia spikes, but but I'm doing full water changes anyways, and it doesn't spike that fast. We're talking about finely powdered food here, not large chunks of food, and it's freeze-dried powder anyway. It's not like it was live food or frozen food. So the ammonia has not really been an issue doing it. And leaving it there for half an hour. Sometimes it takes them 5 or 10 minutes to even realize there's anything on the surface at all, or to be willing to come up and skim the surface for food. So I leave it there, giving him an abundance of opportunity to figure it out and try as much as he wants to try. And he does try. And of course, once I started using that powdered mysis, it occurred to me I could grind up other foods that he likes into a powder. And so ever since then, I've been grinding up all his favorite foods into a nice powder that covers the surface of the tank 4 times a day, half an hour each time. And he just loves to skim his way through that. I have to assume that that's working if he's on day 17 without eating normally. And I do try to feed him normally before I try and put the powder in, because if he will eat normally, I'm not going to powder anything anymore. But he won't eat normally. Even I put the food right up against his mouth. All he has to do is just open his mouth, and he won't do it. So he is not, after 17 days, still not eating normally. But this powdered food solution, I can only guess is working. He's not putting out any poop, so either he's not getting a whole lot into his system, or possibly, because it's a fine powder, maybe it is not sufficiently solid to generate any poop. It may be that it is so efficiently absorbed and used by his body that he just doesn't have anything left over to excrete. I don't know if it's just too little to excrete or if it's just used so efficiently there's nothing to excrete, but I have to guess it must be working to keep him going. Because like I said, he's pretty active and he's still swimming around like nothing's wrong, showing off all his fins, doing all his normal things. He seems to be behaving in as normal a manner as he can given the nature of his injuries. And I can't imagine him, if he were 14 plus days with no food at all, I can't imagine he would have the strength and energy left to behave in anything remotely resembling normal. So I can only guess that this powdering of his food has been successful enough that it's giving him the chance to continue recovering despite not eating normally. And that, I think, is the most important thing I wanted to get across in this video, because it seems to me, as best I can tell from what I have been able to research, that physical trauma on betta fish, there's really not a whole lot you can do. You can do the preemptive medication to make sure he doesn't get infected with anything. You can do the aquarium salts, which are supposed to promote healing. Be very careful to follow the instructions on the salts. Betta fish are, after all, freshwater fish, not saltwater fish, so you need to be mindful of that. But if you follow the instructions, it should be fine. Epsom salt bath if he's got Popeye, that might help. I can't be entirely sure if the Epsom salt bath helped the Popeye in my case. Maybe it did. Maybe if nothing else, at least kept it from getting any worse. Again, there are lots of tutorials on Epsom salt baths. Follow those very closely. Betta fish, obviously, again, not saltwater fish. You need to be mindful in using salt in any form with your fish. Epsom salt bath, aquarium salts, garlic juice, a course of some sort of antibiotic medication, possibly if the injury is of a nature where that might make sense to use. Most of all, because my fish was not eating due to some sort of mouth injury, or perhaps if not injury, then something about the gill was limiting his mouth usage. Either way, whatever the cause, he's not eating, but he is skimming the surface. So powdering up the food to cover the surface, letting him skim the food off the surface, that seems to be working. 17 days into this trauma, past the point of expiration for betta fish to survive without eating, I'm expecting that that's working. And he is still in recovery mode, but he is still recovering, even though he's past the normal expiration date. So that was my big epiphany, that was my big discovery, that's my contribution to how to deal with a betta fish suffering physical trauma that limits his ability to eat. Hopefully your fish will just never suffer a physical trauma and need this kind of help. But if you have the misfortune of having a fish that is struggling to eat due to trauma to his mouth or gills, this is something that you can try. Again, it's not something I can say 100% because my fish is not yet fully recovered, but he has gone past the 10 to 14 day limit of not eating. So it's something that you can definitely consider, give it a try, see if he'll do the skimming. If it's working, great. If he's not skimming the surface, and you may have to give him 5, 10, 15 minutes. My fish doesn't always skim the surface every time. It's not like he's up there skimming the whole 30 minutes. He'll just do a few minutes here or there throughout the 30-minute period. So you have to just sit and watch and see if he's watched the whole time, see if he'll ever do it. And it may take 2 or 3 times before he realizes that he can do it. Something to try a couple of times, see if it's working. If it is, great. Hopefully that will help your fish to recover. If it's not working, hopefully you have a veterinarian in your area experienced with dealing with betta fish. That seems to be kind of the exception. I don't know of too many vets who do have that kind of knowledge on the matter of fish, but if you do, of course, that's always worth a try. In fact, you should try that before you try whatever someone on the internet is telling you. So listen to the expert if you got him, but simply grinding up the food into a nice powder, that's been my trick, and it's worked for my fish with his injuries. And like I said, hopefully your fish never needs it, but if he does, it's something you can consider and try, and hopefully it'll work for your fish too if he has the misfortune of needing it. I will do a follow-up video at some point, maybe a week from now, and let you know what the state of my fish is, see if he's still survived, and if so, if he's making any improvements in his recovery process. I'm very curious myself to see if this is actually going to be a long-term viable practice that I'm doing here with the powdered food. Like I said, it appears to have gotten him past that 14-day expected limit on a betta fish not eating, but the real test will be if he's still around a week from now, and I think he will be because of just how active he seems to be. He seems to be very, very active and happy despite his injuries. I think he's going to make it, but I'll definitely do a follow-up video and let you know how it's going with him, and hopefully I'll have good news to report back when I do.